Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, I am joined by an actress, writer, producer, director, choreographer, voiceover actor, audiobook narrator. She is best known for her role as Alicia Lambert on the 1990s ABC CBS sitcom Step by Step. That's right, it's your favorite narrator and mine, Christine Lakin. Christine, how are you doing?
I'm good, Robert. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I know, first of all, thank you so much for making time to do this. I know you were very, very busy. We were talking a little bit in the green room, like you're a bit of like a Renaissance woman right now. You're doing everything, not just some acting, you're doing, I don't even know how you're squeezing time in right now to do this. So I do appreciate your time. Um,
It was
we
quite
obviously
late
want
signing on. I had a lot of things I was doing today, so I
No,
apologize.
no, no, that's fine. So again, I know that time is limited. We do obviously want to talk about just narration. For a couple years now, I've been chatting with just writers, just because it's always good to kind of catch up and talk shop. Or I think earlier this year, I for whatever reason, I was like, I really want to talk to narrators because you guys, I always say, are like the unsung heroes of publishing because audiobooks have become so popular and you guys are kind of there and you have your own fan base and so I've talked to a lot of narrators and I think all narrators, as far as I can tell, at least except for Hillary Huber, have basically acting backgrounds. She came in it just doing some voiceover work just randomly and then became a narrator. So um, we mentioned obviously in the intro, that's step by step, that's obviously has been, I don't know, would we see haunting you ever? Or like, are you happy that like it has haunted you
It's
this
not
long?
haunting me. No, I mean it's such a huge part of my childhood, which is obviously a long time ago and very separate from who I am now. But it was definitely very formative for me. It was a wonderful experience. I think nostalgia has had a real resurgence, maybe since COVID. I think it still kind of has a place in the zeitgeist. As a simpler time before the internet that people will always look back at fondly. And if step by step is part of that for people's childhoods, I'm all about it. I'm all here for it. So it's really fun. It's fun to dip back into like some of my old world. And I have a podcast, Keenan and Laken give you deja vu. We talk about it. And we talk about all the things that people didn't know because we weren't on the internet back then, our
Yeah.
private lives. So
Yeah, I do want to get
fun to revisit it.
into the podcast a little bit, but first, kind of, I like to do sort of like a Rich Eisen celebrity true or false when there's either a Wikipedia page or an IMDb trivia page or whatever. On your Wikipedia, it says Lakin got her start acting in commercials before landing her first major role as the young Rose in the American Civil War drama The Rose and the Jackal. Is that accurate?
That is true. I
So,
was in Atlanta.
yeah.
Yeah, I joined a children's theater company and was doing a lot of stage work. And there was a very small market at the time in Atlanta. And the manager, the acting teacher and manager of the theater company was also a manager of other children in the industry. And approached my parents, and we ended up doing a couple auditions, just not really thinking much would come from it. And after about booking five or six commercials, my parents thought, well, maybe we should get headshots and like if she really likes it, like make it a thing. So I started in commercials in Atlanta, print work, theater, and then The Rose and the Jackal, yes, was a TNT movie with Christopher Reeve, and it shot in South Georgia, and I played a small part in that. So it's pretty
So
fun.
what was the very first like acting gig you had? And do you remember, I guess, how old were you at that time?
Paid acting gig.
I
Um,
mean, whatever you would consider. I mean, the first thing that really, I mean, it, people always hear about child actors, but it takes a lot of work and dedication, not just on you, but also your family to get to a place where you are, where you became. So, like, I mean, it's usually not a lot like something that happens willy-nilly. It's like, I mean, I mean, yeah, like, can you kind of talk a little bit about that process and kind of, I guess, like how then you ended up on step by step?
Yeah, so my parents were, I'm an only child, number one. So there was time and bandwidth to do things and pursue interests. And my parents were always very supportive of me. They are not necessarily They were not, neither of them were in the business. They were not pursuing acting as a career for me. They were not set up stage parents looking for opportunities. This was, I think, acting, dancing, performing. These were always things that I love to do. And from an early age, they put me in classes because, that's what you do when you don't know where else to put a tiny child. Um, so it was really from there, like they had been approached several times before that to like do child modeling. And my mom always just kind of said, no, thank you. But when we got to Atlanta and there were so many other kids in my theater company that were doing it, and it really seemed like I was thriving and making friends, and I'd found my people at 8 years old. That's sort of when I think my parents were like, all right, let's give it a shot. So giving it a shot really just meant like there were no headshots, there was no agent. We were going to a casting office in Midtown Atlanta and on like the whim of an acting coach who was also kind of a manager and just like signing in and seeing what it was all about. Like had no idea. And it all felt like play to me always. So I think because of that it just came really naturally to me. I was also very tiny for my age, so I could take direction like an 8 or 9 or 10-year-old, but I looked like a 6 or 7-year-old, which as a director is very fortuitous because you can ask a 9 or 10-year-old to do something and cognitively they'll understand you a lot more, but it looks like this very tiny person is doing this very complicated thing. So I think that worked to my advantage. My first commercial, I believe, was for Six Flags Whitewater. It was the amusement park, the water park in Georgia. It was a regional commercial. We shot it in May, I believe. Little bit cold to be at a water park in May. My lips were blue, but I had the best time. And so that kind of was, I think, the bug. And from there, tons of commercials, tons of print work, got the agent. I was doing theater in South Georgia with my theater company. And an agent from Los Angeles, a mom who was becoming a manager or an agent, she didn't know at the time, was there with her son and her daughter. And they were both in the business and they were vacationing and doing some charity work. And they happened to come to our show. And that woman essentially approached my mom and said, "Hey, if you're ever in LA, I would really like to maybe represent your daughter. I'm opening an agency." And my mom again was sort of like, "I don't think that's our journey, but thank you, and we'll let you know." And about a year later, all of my theater friends were going to Los Angeles for spring break. We didn't go to the same schools, and I was devastated because my spring break didn't line up. They were going to meet casting directors and go to Universal Studios and just like all the fun things. And so my mom promised me she would take me solo. So my mom and I went, we met up with the manager just to kind of check those dots. And we ended up doing like a demo tape because there was no Skyping, there was no live streaming, there was no FaceTiming.
Right.
So we made a tape. I had a monologue prepared. We did that just so she would have it. The producer from Step by Step was in the control booth walking through at the time and saw me. Like that is how random and happenstance
Did,
my
did you all, so
big
like you
break
didn't
was.
audition? It's just
I
they
did.
saw your tape or
No, I did audition, but he just happened to see me walking through, asked what was going on. I was doing a very dramatic monologue from the movie Irreconcilable Differences, and where Drew Barrymore plays a character who's divorcing her parents. So I was doing that monologue and I was crying. And of course, it was like, what's happening down there? And they said, this is just, we're doing a favor for someone. He said, okay, fine. And then 2 months later, they were looking for this girl for this character for Step by Step, and she was the last role to be cast and they couldn't find anybody for it. Someone had fallen out, they were up against it, and Bob Boyette, this producer, very prolific producer, said, "I remember there was a girl that I saw in a control booth." And in the pilot of Step by Step, if you may remember, my character Al gets appendicitis and has this very touching moment with Suzanne Summers' character. And so there was some dramatic chops that needed to be had, and he basically said, "Find me that kid." And I got a call and they said they want to see you tomorrow in Los Angeles. And I said, "This is crazy." Nobody flies across the country for an audition. And my dad said, well, I've got some frequent flyer miles saved up if you want to go. I'm happy to send you. But if you don't want to go, that's okay. There was never any pressure from my parents to do any of
Yeah.
this. And so I said, okay, for sure. And so we went, I did the audition and thought, whatever. And then the next day we got a call and they said, you booked the job, you leave, you come on, you'll have to stay because we were going home. You have to stay. And on Monday we go to Magic Mountain to shoot the titles for the show.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, I don't think people really, or I should say kids these days, don't really appreciate just how big TGIF was back in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think there's anything, I mean, I guess maybe like, Stranger Things, Squid Game, or like these huge streamers, but like, I don't know, like back then, obviously there wasn't streaming. There wasn't like, 100 channels. It was, TGIF was huge. And you guys were coming in, Step by Step was coming in kind of later. So like, I think it was after Full House, right? Like Full
It was
House was no
after Full
longer.
House. Yep.
So I
And
mean,
then Boy
did
Meets
you at least
World.
have that like were you, I mean, clearly aware of just like this was like kind of a big deal, right? Like getting on one of these shows.
Oh no, it was very much a big deal for me because I was 12 years old. I was very much aware of TGIF. I was watching TGIF. Perfect Strangers was one of my favorite shows. So, I had no idea where this was going to be on the lineup. I didn't know anything about it. And we did the pilot, and half the people on that pilot said, this is a great pilot and everything, but don't count your chickens because not every pilot goes. And not only that, not every actor goes with it. They could
Mm,
recast you in a moment. So, you know, I mean, with two big stars like that and going to Magic Mountain to film title sequences, it looked pretty good
yeah.
that at least the show was gonna go. But yeah, I mean, it was definitely a very big deal when I found out it was going to be TGIF, of course. Like I was thrilled. I was like beside myself.
So to be clear, I guess what I meant was when you were doing the audition though, I mean, you knew it'd be a first, like you kind of was like, oh, no big deal. You went and did it. I mean, like, I guess how nervous were you, or were you at a stage even at 12 years old where you just didn't really kind of let that pressure get to you?
I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what the show was. I didn't know who the stars were.
Okay.
I
Okay.
I
They
didn't know it
didn't.
was TGIF. I didn't know that I was auditioning for like Tom Miller, Bob Boyette, who created
Oh,
Happy
okay.
Days,
I thought you
and
were
Shirley.
aware of all this stuff already.
No, I
Okay,
was
okay, okay.
12. I was just like, it's another audition, just like I do audition. I do auditions all the time. They're fun.
Yeah.
There was zero pressure, zero
Okay.
pressure. And by the way, like, I was thinking about the fact that I was supposed to dissect a frog and I missed it. And I was like quite curious about that. So I was like, well, I guess I'll go back and just dissect that frog. Like, it was really, yeah.
And then so I think I, in my very limited research, I think on YouTube I saw a clip, which I think was probably like the second episode. It was like you and Urkel. Does that sound
Mm,
right? And
yes.
again,
Yes.
I don't think people nowadays really understand just the huge star power of Urkel back then. And you were essentially sharing screen time with him on the
Yeah.
second episode of this brand new show on TGIF.
Yeah. And it wasn't the second episode that we filmed actually.
Mm.
I think it was maybe like the fifth or sixth. And I only know this from doing a deep dive on our podcast.
Right.
But I know that one of the reasons they reversed the order was because Urkel was already a breakout character.
Yeah.
Um, Urkel was never meant to be a series regular. They were just going to bring this character on and have him for like one episode. But the audience, the studio audience, responded so much to him that they all looked at each other and said, "Oh my gosh, like we found our Fonzie." This is always the thing you have to understand with these producers. If you look at the track record of these shows, Mork and Mindy, Perfect Strangers, Full House, Family Matters, there's always like one quirky breakout kind of character. And they found that in Urkel and they needed to bring that, they literally put him in a jetpack and he crashed in our show. I mean, it's ridiculous. But that was to bring people so they didn't turn the TV off
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
and just to try to, continue to build the audience.
Yeah.
I
Um,
was freaking out because I mean, hello, I was a huge fan of his. Huge.
Yeah. In fact, I think that episode ends, if I remember the clip correctly, like you guys are in like doing the Urkel dance at the end of the
Yep.
episode.
Yep.
So, well, anyway, all right. Well, I don't want to spend much more time on this, but you mentioned the podcast, so let's kind of just touch base about that. So, there's been a lot of rewatch podcasts that have happened relatively recently. I think, obviously because The Office is so huge, The Office Ladies was one of the bigger ones. You were doing this with Stacey Keenan, is that correct? Is it?
That's right.
How did that come about? And was there any, I don't know, was there any other cast members that, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, can you talk a little bit just how that formed?
Sure. So about, I'd say, gosh, I think it's maybe even 4 years ago. Stacy and I have been in touch over the years, and she actually left the entertainment industry, went to law school, and became a criminal defense attorney. I'm sorry, a criminal prosecutor, excuse me. And she was working for the DA's office in Riverside. And it's a job that she feels very passionately about, but I can't say that there's a lot of humor perhaps in that profession. And we were just talking one day and she was like, I have this idea to do a rewatch podcast. Um, I, I would really like to watch the show. She never watched it. So she's watching everything for the very first time. And I didn't realize that. So I really thought that was kind of interesting. And and she was interested in doing it with me, and I thought it would be really fun to do it with her. So we very slowly started to explore this idea, and we actually recorded a lot of episodes before we ever released them, and we kind of just like sat on them, not knowing really what the next step was, where we were going to go, were we going to try to go on a network. We decided eventually, after finding Stephen Ray Morris, who's our producer and our editor, our engineer, that we were just going to go ahead and release them independently and do all the extra work ourselves.
Hmm.
Um, there is joy in that because these are our stories, these are our collected shared memories, and we really wanted to own our IP. So. He helped us kind of clean up our episodes, and I think we really found our groove through that first season. And now we're in the middle almost of season three. And it's been really fun. I mean, we recap the episodes. I know fans really enjoy that, but we also talk a lot in the latter half about things that the two of us have never really spoken about. We were very different ages when we did this show. I started when I was 12 and she was 16. That's a huge age difference at that
Yeah.
time. Now, not so much. We're 4 years apart and like there's not a ton of age difference anymore. But there were a lot of things during that show that she was going through that I was not privy to, and things that I remember that she doesn't remember at all. And not only that, just the time of the 90s, like what it was like to be a preteen in the 90s, what it was like to be a teenager, what it was like to be on television, what it was like to be super recognizable, what it was like to go back to a high school in Georgia, which is where I lived, still lived during that entire time, and kind of like straddle those worlds of LA and fame and then like complete normalcy. And then just, how we've sort of her leaving the business and then me pivoting in 100 different directions throughout the last few decades. So yeah, it's a little of everything. Then of course we have guests on former cast members and people who worked on the show and friends of TGIF. So it's a fun ride.
And if people want to check that out, they can just check it out on the usual podcast streaming services.
Yeah, it's Keenan and Laken give you deja vu, and we're everywhere you find your podcasts.
Perfect. Right. So, okay. So you mentioned with Stacy, obviously some child. I mean, this happens honestly for everybody in the business. Like, not many people actually are successful enough to continue it for, the longevity is there. So oftentimes they, leave for one reason or another, or they pivot and they do other stuff. You've been pretty active. I mean, you've been doing acting, producing, directing, writing, choreography. I mean, there's so much to really go over. I do want to talk a little bit though about Love and Laken because I went down that rabbit hole on YouTube, and so much so that theme song got stuck in my head, I feel like. But like, how did that come about? I mean, like, what stage were you in your career? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because it's a very, for people who, I'm sure who are not aware, it's a little like mockumentary style about you kind of getting back, into business, but clearly it's all just tongue in cheek, and there's a lot of great cameos. Um, yeah, I mean, how did that? I mean, I guess why did you decide to do something like that?
I was sort of in a place in my career where I was getting a couple of really great small roles. I'd had a few bigger roles. I'd done a bunch of pilots that never saw the light of day. I was just kind of in that like middle ground area. And I had taken a class. I'd done the artist's way with a bunch of friends, and I just kind of had the inspiration to write something. And it was the first time I think I really felt like writing something and I wasn't scared of doing it. I think that's sometimes for writers, I don't know, you can probably attest to this. Would I ever, I can't put my hands to the keys because oh my God, is it just going to be awful? And what will people think? And I can't even have a good original idea in my brain. But I had this idea, what if I wrote something that only I could write? That only I could play. What if I played a version of myself? And I was a huge fan of The Comeback with Lisa Kudrow.
Mm, yeah.
And the office had started to get really big. And so my friend at the time was doing documentaries about really like sad subjects. And he and I were just collaborating one day, and he had a ton of cameras. And he's like, Laken, we should just do something together. And I said, it's funny you mentioned that because I have an idea for a fake documentary. And he was like, okay, tell me more. And so web series were just starting to be a thing. And I pitched it to him. He thought it was really funny. We had a blast working together. We went and pitched it to a production company, Oops Donuts Productions. They came on board. And simultaneously, as I was writing the episodes, I was working on a movie called You Again for Disney. And so just kind of through those channels, I was able to ask, and they graciously said yes, some of the cast members from that movie. So Kristen Bell's in an episode, Kristen Chenoweth is in an episode, Kyle Bornheimer. Also at the time, I had started doing voices for Family Guy. So Seth MacFarlane's in an episode. So I was really able to pull a lot of those favors and friends in to do these things. And frankly, just to make a lot of fun of myself. Like this person who had once been on a TV show and like was just really living in this world that doesn't exist, that she's a huge star still. So I had a lot of fun with it. I mean, it's still one of the favorite things I think I've ever worked on. But and you don't really know where these things are going to go. Wasn't doing it thinking that, oh, I mean, it's a web series. I was like, I'm just going to have a lot of fun with this. And, it was a really good first experience at producing and writing and starring in something. And we did lots of film festivals and it won at a few. And then it eventually, I mean, it took me to France. I got to do all kinds of cool things. And then we eventually sold it to Hulu. So, and it was the impetus for when Jimmy Fox called. That was really the impetus for him to talk to me about Hollywood Darlings. So I really see that as that was kind of paving the way many years later for the next iteration of what that show was.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, I would encourage anyone to check it out. I think all the episodes are streaming on YouTube, Love and Lakin. And again, Hollywood Darlings, is a really fun show. I'm sure you can find at least some episodes, I think, on YouTube and maybe elsewhere. But let's get into audiobooks. So, with everything going on, as if you did not have enough to do, can you talk about just like how this started? I mean, like before, like were you aware of audiobooks? Because I think a lot of people, some people just are not fans of audiobooks. They have no time for it. And quite honestly, I mean, yes, now Audible exists, Spotify. I mean, people can just listen to audiobooks on their phone. Back in the day, you needed to have like, um, a CD player and you had to have like a thing of like 10 CDs that you had to then like, put in the car, wherever else. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, can you kind of talk about just kind of that process of also starting to get into the audiobook world?
Yeah, I mean, I remember books on tape. Even when I started in this, we were still calling them books on tape, I think. And I mean, they were CDs at that point,
Yeah.
um, but I had started doing voiceover work. I had sort of expanded my career into that. I'd always loved just manipulating my voice. I loved trying to mimic people. I love accents. I'm obsessed with people's accents. I love the nuances of different regions of people's accents. And I really thought, oh, I think voiceover and animation sounds really fun. It was really just through that. I got an agent. I started, booking some animated stuff, and an audition came through for a audiobook. It was Holly Black and who wrote Spiderwick Chronicles, and it was called The Coldest Girl in Cold Town.
Yeah. Okay.
Vampire books were very big at this time. This is off the heels of Twilight. And I got it. And I thought, oh, this is cool. This is different. And it was the first one I ever did. And it was a learning curve. I had no idea what I was doing. I
Yeah.
didn't know how to punch in. I didn't know how to pace. I couldn't remember what voice I had just done. So the diction is a big part of it. Pacing is a big part of it. The melody of your voice. Just I was thrown into the deep end. And I had a wonderful director, Dennis Kao, who I mentioned. He and I have worked together now for almost 15 years. I work with, of course, lots of directors, but he and I have done a lot of books together. And he was so patient and wonderful. And really from there, I, I loved doing it, but it just kind of snowballed for me. And I did several more, and sometimes I auditioned for them, but over the last 15 years, it started to become like the incoming call. And as an actor, let me tell you something. The incoming call is maybe like the most precious thing you can get.
Yep.
It's when you're not having to pound the pavement to try to get someone to say, please, please let me do my art. Someone says, hey, would you come help me do my art? It's like amazing. It's awesome. I'm so grateful for it. I absolutely love this job. I love this part of my career. It has been the most constant part of my career through all the different things. The two times I was pregnant, oh my gosh, I just thanked my lucky stars every day that I could go to work in my jammies and my big pregnant blouses when I couldn't work on camera, and I could sit and just read stories. I mean, I love books. I've always loved books. And I used to have a fantasy of getting locked in a bookstore, like a Barnes and Noble, and they would like turn out, they'd like close the doors and lock it. And I'd be like, oh my God, amazing. No one will bother me. My dad goes, Christine, it's called a library. I was like, I know, but it's different in a bookstore. I can't explain it.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, and then yeah, it's just kind of snowballed. And there have been times when I've been really busy in other parts of my career, and I sadly have had to turn work down. But it's also been one of these careers that's been flexible enough that if I can say, "Ooh, like what's your deadline? Could we push it? Could we pull it up? Could I make it? Could I make it work?" That I've been able to sort of navigate around it and just continue to do it. And many times I go in at 9 and I like to be done around 3. I'm not like some people who go for, 10 hours a day because I like to pick up my kids.
Yeah.
So it's also a job that, unlike a lot of other jobs that I've done in this industry, I'm not on set for 12 to 14 hours a day. And that's also a huge blessing for me.
So to be clear, at the time you were doing voiceover work, but you were not pursuing the idea of starting to narrate audiobooks. Someone had just reached out to you randomly. I mean, obviously they were
Yeah.
familiar with your work and thought, "Hey, would you be interested in doing an audition?" And I guess I should note for people who aren't aware, like just like with any type, I guess, acting, oftentimes audiobook narrators are auditioning. They'll do samples. So, and we can get into the Avery Bishop novel that just came out today, The Chateau. You were one of, I forget how many they had sent. I think maybe like 6 or 8 auditions where I think you were reading like a page or two from, and quite honestly, having listened to the sample, it was like some random chapter later in the book. Like it wasn't like chapter one, I think that would just be, you would think would just be normal, but they wanted to do, and you just, I guess you spend, I mean, like when you get auditions, how much, I don't want to say prep, but I mean, how much time goes into that? Because I'm assuming you're not just like reading it, sitting down, doing it, or is that what happens?
Oftentimes you're not getting the full manuscript. A
Right.
lot of times the manuscript's not available. They're not sending out the full manuscript, which is normal. I mean, as an actor, many times you're not getting the full script. You're just getting what they call sides, even for on-camera auditions. So I'm very used to that. But usually there would be, 3 or 4 pages. Hopefully you've sent maybe a couple pages before and after. So what
Mm.
I like to do is not only do I read the synopsis, hopefully you're sending me a the person sending it is sending a synopsis of some kind, or I'm looking it up online to see if I can find anything just about the general genre of the book, what the characters are, what the story is. And then I'm reading through it. And honestly, for me, I read it once or twice and I just go on instinct. I'm like, okay. this to me is what the words are giving me this vibe. It feels like it wants to be mysterious. It feels like it might want to be a bit quirky. It feels like it might, this, someone speaking, the dialogue is all very like, it's all very familiar or it's very comedic. Like, okay, it's a rom-com. Like I just I think of the text in my head almost like a movie. Like while I'm doing it, I'm always setting the scene for myself while I'm reading it, if that makes sense. And then I'm also trying to be just really careful about diction, pronunciation, pacing, as I've said. And certainly, choosing voices that I think are not only sustainable for myself, because working for 6 or 7 hours, you want to make sure that you can sustain that and not hurt yourself, um, but that are also appropriate and varied enough, so that the listener is getting a sense of who these people are, hopefully, without everybody kind of running together. So I mean, that's generally how I prep for an audition.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say on the other side, on the author side, typically, clearly, like when we're working on a novel, we have a voice already in our head of what the main character might sound like. If it's something maybe written in first person, or even in third person, just, what these characters sound like. And so I think authors typically already have that in their heads. So then when they're getting these auditions from narrators who, again, are only getting a few pages and not really getting the full scope of the novel or the whole or all the context. It's, when the auditions came in for the Chateau, a few of them just immediately like, I really like the narrators, but it just didn't feel right. And, it came down, I think you and another narrator was just like, he was hard to pick, but just gut wise, we're like, I think Christine would be really perfect for this. And again, we talk a little bit more about that later, but, okay, so you start narrating. You've done now like well over 200, I guess, you said it'd be probably between 2 and 300. Um, so how much prep then goes into it? I found that some narrators, they like to read the entire manuscript first. Some find they don't have the time and they might, you know what I mean? Like what have you found is the best way to prep? And then has that changed over the course of 200 plus books?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I generally always read at least the first 100 pages before I start, because I feel like it's really important to get the beginning right. If you don't know what you're walking into and then there's a huge change, somehow at the very least you have to get the tone right from the beginning. Um, and sometimes there will even be coverage on the book. Sometimes, so, not only a word pronunciation list of things that might be different or strange. Sometimes I'll get that from somebody if I don't have to, if I'm not necessarily doing it myself. So I'll be looking for those things. And then I'm also looking for characters. I'm looking to decide, oh, I think I'm going to do that voice for that character. This person sounds like they're more like this. So I'm already kind of earmarking in my head what I think I'm going to do character-wise. But honestly, if it's a mystery or it's like a true crime type thing, a lot of times I don't want to read the ending. I have a fear that I will somehow tip the ending for the audience just by knowing what's going to happen. So for instance, I didn't know the ending of The Chateau until I read it.
Okay.
And I think honestly, that was really good for me
Yeah.
because I was actually quite surprised. And
Not to
and
give
it
any
was
spoilers,
in a
but like
good way.
ending, you mean? Because there's a couple different twists or surprises. You mean like the
Yes.
end, or kind of like more of like the beginning of part three end?
Like the beginning of part three. And I
Okay,
had
okay, okay, yeah, yeah,
ideas of
yeah,
what was
okay,
going to happen.
yeah, 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 okay,
I had already gotten up to that point and I had ideas of what was going to happen, but just for the sake of not wanting to like tip too much,
yeah.
I just decided that I wasn't going to read the end. And that was also I was working on a book years ago, by an author named Stephen Chbosky.
Oh
Um,
yes, that was a huge book. Yeah.
Huge book, yeah, called Imaginary Friend. He wrote The Perks of Being a Wallflower. And it was a very long book. And we were working together. He directed the book. And we got like halfway through, and I had been reading ahead every night. And then he asked me, he said, hold on, where are you in the book? And I said, well, we were like halfway through a day. And I said, oh, I'm about 50 pages further. He was like, I want you to stop reading. I was like, okay. And he's like, I just have a feeling what you're doing is so perfect, and I I don't want you to know the ending. And it was actually like from that point on that I was like, oh my God, that's a great tool. So I try to be careful, especially when there is mystery or intrigue, not to get too far in because
Yeah.
I don't like to tip it.
So you mentioned before you like the like different accents and dialects. Do you speak any other languages? Like if it's a novel that has, calls for some type of lines in Spanish or Russian or anything like that, like do you feel confident enough to make it work and sound realistic, plausible?
With different languages, I mean, Spanish, I used to be quite fluent in when I was in high school. So Spanish is pretty easy for me. French has always been hard for me. French, I have to hear phonetically. I can't even look at it because to me, it never looks anything like what I'm hearing. So I can definitely do it. I just have to kind of take it line by line, and I can't look at the page when I do it. There are some books too. I mean, I did a whole series. Um, I'm blanking on the author's name. I'll remember it in a minute. I did a whole series that was adapted. She's one of the biggest crime authors in
Oh,
like
Sarah,
Sarah
Bledsoe
Blit
yeah,
yes, yeah.
yeah.
Um, but her books are all adapted from Dutch. And so the most of it, of course, the main prose of the book is all just, English, but then there will be these names and places,
Hmm.
and there's usually a lot of them because in a crime book, people are investigating people and places. And Dutch, I don't know if you've ever attempted. It's why
Yeah,
people are like, it's all Dutch to me. It
yeah.
doesn't look anything like it sounds. And you should have seen, like, my phonetic list was like, it was insane. But once I got used to it, that first book almost like took me for a loop. But once I got used to her and her writing, and then I started to remember things, I mean, it was wild. It was wild how,
Well,
like,
that
even
actually,
2 years later, I would be like, oh no, we pronounce that Velche. I know it starts with an H, but it's Velche.
yeah. I mean, I mean, obviously you do some series and we can get into the whole Michael Connolly of it all, but I guess when you are doing series, like obviously you're not doing book back to back. Usually it's like a year before the next book comes out. How, like, are you keeping notes or are you keeping files somewhere of like certain characters, how they sound, so that, people who are listening or binging these novels, that all of a sudden, one of the main or secondary characters just suddenly doesn't sound different, even though it's because sometimes I feel like, and it, for one reason or another, sometimes when it's a series, one narrator might do like a couple books and then all of a sudden it's another narrator. And that usually throws listeners for a loop, which is understandable. So it's great when, the same narrator can just do this, the entire series the whole way through. But like, yeah, I mean, so how do you kind of handle a series to make sure that everything is consistent book to book?
Well, luckily, most of the series I've done, I've ended up working with the same director, which is so helpful because we help each other sort of remember what we had done in the last book. And a lot of times, those files will still be at the studio. And not only have the engineers and the director, like, he's like, oh, I pulled up a bunch of stuff from the last one. I was like, oh, thank you. I was going to ask you if you wouldn't mind doing that. And then other times I just remember. But there'll be like one character that comes up that I'll earmark and say, I'm sorry, I don't remember usually I always remember at least the main ones, but I'll say, I don't really know if I remember this. Can we just stop and like listen for a minute? And we'll go back to the other book and kind of type in that person's name and then we'll sort of listen along. So, but I mean, it's been incredibly helpful. I think we keep really good like character notes on these folks like in audio form. And that's been, I mean, and I can usually just hear a couple lines and I'm like, oh, right, it's that. Okay.
Yeah. So do you have your own home studio? Because I know like during COVID, that was a big thing. I remember talking to Eduardo Ballerini that a lot of the narrator community really kind of were getting in touch with each other to build their own studio so they could continue working. Like, do you have your own home studio to narrate, or do you go to a studio that a publisher might host?
I have a home studio. I did use it during COVID. It was not the best at the time because I had two really young children at home.
Mm.
So it was really hard to get total quiet at that time. So I was doing a lot of like 4 a.m. wake up and record and like 11 p.m. record. It was rough. But we've done rougher things in COVID. Um, but now, I'll say this, I've resisted it for a long time. And I'll tell you why. Two things. One, I like the camaraderie of going to work. I like leaving my house. I like going to work. I like being with a director or an engineer or a director, even if it's on Zoom. Even if I'm sitting in my own booth in a different place, I really like, for me, just going in and just focusing on my work, which is just my acting. When I have a computer in front of me and I'm also doing levels and I'm also setting my mic and I'm also watching out for my own pronunciation or my diction and I'm also punching myself in, for me, I can do it, but I'm now doing four other people's jobs. And I don't know. I like working with all of those people. I don't want to take all of their jobs,
Yeah.
number one. And number two, I feel like I feel like the actor, as someone who has directed an actor, I would never ask them to also hold the light on themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I've resisted it. Can I do it? Yes. Is it my favorite way to do it? No, but I can.
Yeah. So did you so okay, so I found that basically, excuse me, I feel like I'm losing my voice now. I guess that kind of is, I guess is another question. Like, are there times where all of a sudden you get sick and you have to put like a pin in, recording just because maybe you had gotten like halfway through a book and then all of a sudden you start losing your voice and clearly you can't continue because that's going to, I mean, has that ever happened?
Oh my gosh, it's happened a couple of times and it's the worst feeling, truly. I had laryngitis for like 2 weeks over Christmas last year. Never had laryngitis like that before. I've had hoarseness for sure. I've had sickness that turned into stuffiness, that turned into coughing, and that makes me hoarse. And that's like not a great thing. You're just drinking tea and having sprays and doing everything you can to just try to make it through. Um, but the full on not being able to speak scared the bejesus out of me. Um, and it lasted for like 5 days. And I truly started to think I was just never going to speak again. It was awful. It came back, obviously. But yeah, it's scary and it's a bummer, you know? I hate whenever I start to get sick and I can tell, and I hate having to like call the studio and say, I'm so sorry. Like, and I am a person who, and I think just because of my background, probably for better or for worse, as a child actor, I've always just pushed through. I mean, if you had strep throat and you had a film, too bad, you got to go. Like, no
Yeah.
one's stopping. So I will generally, unless I am literally on my deathbed, I will go to work or have COVID or something. So yeah, but I hate having to do that. I usually never do it unless it's really dire or I think it's actually going to harm my voice in the future.
Yeah. So in terms of the prep for each title, not every book is the same. There are a lot of, especially I think in the psychological suspense space, there is a lot of those, I guess, is a dual narration where, you have one character reading the female point of view, you have another like male character reading male point of view, going back and forth. And quite honestly, even with the Chateau, we had conversations with my editor if we wanted to bring in a second narration because there's a first person present tense narration, then there's a third person present tense narration from a different point of view. And honestly, the reason we did not do it, and this isn't, I don't want to give too much away because again, this book just came out, but in part three, there's also another point of view narration, and it would have been too jarring to bring in. So we just decided it'd be better just stick with a really strong narrator for the entire book. Um, but for those books like, the Michael Connelly, like, can we talk real quick about Michael Connelly? Like, was that from an audition or did someone just reach out to you and say, hey, we'd love you to, be the voice for these Renee Ballard books?
I'm trying to think, that was several years ago now. I probably auditioned. I mean, that was a pretty big series.
Yeah.
So I'm sure I laid down an audition for that. I would say, at this point in my career, it's hard to say. It's probably half and half. If it's a new author that doesn't really know me, sometimes they'll send samples and then I'll also read a page. Sometimes it's just, oh, hey, the author really likes your voice and would like to know if you'd like to narrate. his or her book, which is the incoming call I talked about, which is always
Yeah.
like so flattering and like wonderful. But for Connolly, I'm sure I auditioned. Um, I got the job and I remember thinking, oh my God, like this is a big deal. My dad has been reading Michael Connolly books for decades. Like no one is going to be more excited than my dad. So I told him and he was like, oh my God, this is, he's so excited. And of course I got the manuscript and I like finished it and then I like sly sent it to my dad. I'm like, don't tell anyone, but you can read it. Don't tell anyone. Um, but so it was pretty fun for him. But anyway, I'm so grateful for that job. I absolutely love that character. I love that series. I feel like I get to be such a badass in life. And I think that's one of the other things I love so much about this job. I get to play so many and embody so many different types of people that I would never get cast as in a live action as an actor. I get to be old women and badass cops and complete psychopaths and jerky senators. And I mean, I get to do all kinds of things, and then that I think speaks to maybe like the theater part of me, like putting on the play. I feel like I get to put on the little like radio play.
Yeah. But with a book like that, where you are doing some of the chapters and another
Mhm.
narrator's doing the other chapters, is that something again where you are reading the entire book to kind of see what's going on when you're not on page, or are you just really focusing on your chapters? And again, I guess maybe that varies book to book.
Yeah, it does vary book to book. I mean, generally, if it's like that, like even with, some of the Abby Jimenez books I've done, a lot of those are dual narration as well. And although those are not, those are more like romantic comedy, romance. But you really need to know how the other person, it does still fuel the storyline. So even if it's not my chapter, I at least need to like kind of skim it to see how that character's feeling about the other character. Or if there's like a plot point that I really need to know.
Yeah.
So yeah, generally I focus more on my chapters, and what I need to know, what I need to read, what I need to prepare. But I generally at least skim through so I don't miss anything.
Have you done any of those books where, and I forget what the proper term is, but it's the one where like one narrator is doing the exposition and then like you would pipe in with a line of dialogue. And you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
I forget,
it's
but
like a
like have you done any of those
multicast.
books? Because personally I'm not a fan, or at least the ones that I've heard, I didn't really think were done well. It felt too jarring. But I know that that is popular with some genres too.
I've done a couple. I wasn't in the same room as anyone.
Yeah.
So I was just it was almost like just doing wild lines, if that makes sense. And then they would have to edit it all together because there's like multiple people in the book and like five different characters, five different or six different people. And then they all had different chapters, but then they were all in one scene. I don't know. I don't know how that turns out. But in one of the last books I did, I did do some of my lines of dialogue. I ended up re-recording some of my lines of dialogue in the other person's chapter, if
Hmm.
that makes sense. Like if it's
Yeah.
a male female point of view, I at least did my lines of dialogue in his chapter. So I don't know. I mean, you tell me as an author. I think it's more jarring to hear a man doing a woman's voice than a woman maybe like scaling down to like
I
I
think
guess it depends on the
honestly,
intonation.
it depends on the narrator because I think some
Yeah.
narrator, and I mean, if it's the entire, if it's like, like I'm just gonna throw him out because he had narrated one of my more recent books under my own name, Eduardo Ballerini, like he's narrating the entire book. So if he's doing more female, it's not as jarring than all of a sudden, you're dealing with a lot of different narrators. Which, speaking of a lot of different narrators, in the time we have left, because time's getting short, the favorites. I'm listening to the favorites right now. This has been
Yeah.
a really huge book. Was this one that, I mean, you basically, it's really hard to explain, but like, I don't know. I'm only a couple hours
Like a
into it, but like, it's
documentary?
essentially, it's about what's that?
Like a documentary?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was kind of like for anybody who's not aware, like kind of like the Jay-Z or the Jay-Z, the Daisy Jones and the Six book that had come out a couple years ago. Very similar style, where it's there's like a lot of like yes, it's kind of like a narrative documentary with a lot of different voices. You, however, are kind of doing a lot of the heavy lifting because you're like primarily the narrator of I guess of the main character, Katerina. Was that one from audition or was that offered? And can you kind of talk a little bit about that experience? Because again, like you're in, from what I can tell, a good majority of the book, but there's other parts that you were not, involved in.
Right. I think I may have laid down an audition. I either did or they sent samples. I don't remember because it was at least a year ago. But I do remember when I got it and I started to look through the manuscript, I knew that I was reading like the majority of it, but I found it really interesting, like those interstitial pages where they would have like almost the TMZ kind
Yeah.
of reporter, the Perez Hilton or whatever it was of the book. I mean, I really found I was like, oh, this is going to be a really interesting way to weave like the current narrative in with actually someone's more personal experience because it does feel like it really vacillates back and forth between this like the media frenzy of what was going on and then what was really going on under the scene. So I think it came out really well. I think it worked really well. It was an interesting, yeah. I mean, I primarily focused on my scenes in that because the other parts of it felt very other in that particular novel. So I really focused just on Katerina and her journey because I felt like that was so much of the heart of what, those two women went through and what that relationship between them was. And I mean, I quite enjoyed it. I thought it was really well done. And yeah, I really enjoyed reading that one.
Yeah. No, I definitely think it's one of those, at least again, I'm only listening to the audiobook, but I feel it's like one of those novels that is actually enhanced by the audiobook experience. Because, well, I guess really, I mean, like, do you typically listen to any of your work after the fact? Like,
I
I
try not
understand that
to.
you might listen to it as you're kind of maybe doing it to see if stuff sounds right, but like 6 months or however long it takes until the book comes out, do you ever actually like sit down and try to like just listen to it, or do you find
Oh,
yourself kind of cringing and like, oh, I don't
yes.
like that? Yeah,
It's like it's that thing. I don't know. Yes, you want to make sure that you're doing a good job. You want to make sure if there's anything that you can glean from it, if there's anything that you can improve upon, that you're doing your due diligence in that way. But it's also when you sit in a booth and you tell a story and you actually are listening to your own voice for like 6 hours, you really get sick of your own voice. And then I come home and my kids are like, "Will you read me a book before bed?" I'm like, "Yes." So, I tend to, if I'm going to listen to an audiobook, which I've been doing a lot more of lately, it's usually not mine.
yeah. Well, okay. So in the time remaining, are there any projects you've done in the past or any upcoming projects that, you really kind of want to give any shout outs to? Or is there anything that you've read that you're not involved with or seen or listened to that you would recommend?
Ooh, that's a great question. Yeah, I'm starting a new Baldacci book. I'm going to be a very small role in the next one, but I think he's a great author. I've done another one of his in the past, and the sides I read were quite dramatic, so I'm looking forward to that. I think I record that in a couple weeks. And then there was a book I did recently. I'm sorry, I have to look up the titles of these of the I said this to you before we were live, but sometimes books stuck out in my mind, but then it's so hard for me to remember all the titles because I'm like, oh God, all the titles everything is like mashing together. Which one was this again?
Oh, yeah,
Which is a
absolutely.
good problem to have. But I read this really interesting book. Her name is Emily, I think I'm saying this right. I hope I'm saying it right. Emily Hunt Keevil, and she wrote a book called Dwelling. And I just narrated that in the spring. And she's a new author, and I thought it was really good. I thought it was really, really well done. You read a lot of books, you become snobby about books.
Yeah,
But
no,
I really
absolutely.
liked her. She's a new author. I think her book is great. I thought it was funny, it was poignant. There's social commentary in it. It's a little weird. I like stuff like that. It was surprising. It didn't go in places I thought it was going to go. And I guess as someone who reads a lot of books, and I always am trying, just like with movies, I always try to predict the ending. I like when I'm wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so
Yeah.
dwelling, good. I have to check that out. In the time remaining, real quick, do you have any pet peeves though when you're narrating? Certain things that stick out to you when you get to it in the manuscript, and you're like, oh God. And you have to read it because basically you're hired to read word for word.
Um, Pet peeves. This is a good one. Um, one pet peeve of mine is using the same phrasing
Hmm.
when a character in his or her mind says the same thing often. I don't know, it's a pet peeve. Um, because I feel like there's other ways to say things, and you're always wanting to try to mix it up. But when I'm seeing the same phrasing over and over again, I kind of, yeah.
And that's
Um,
something honestly an editor should catch or a good copy
yeah,
editor, but yeah, it happens.
it happens. I mean, every now and then I'll catch like a mistake in a book, although I don't fault anyone for it. I'm the worst speller in the world. So it's usually not that, but like a grammatical error or like a double word or something. And I just go on and read it because I'm like, is that what they meant?
Yeah.
And then usually the director will stop and say, I think that's a typo. I said, okay, I thought so too. And I wasn't gonna. So that's kind of funny. Um, but I mean, generally, no, I guess pet peeves are not there's not too many of them, but I certainly have favorite ones. I have favorite books and ones that like I said, that really stick out in my mind and that I think about afterward, or ones that I'm like, gosh, that would make a great TV series, or that would make a really good movie. And then guess what? Someone else thinks that too. And then they go ahead and start making it. So I guess my question to you, Robert, is who's making the chateau?
That's a whole other conversation.
Okay.
It's some, yeah, we'll see.
All right. Well, when you
But
make it when you make it a limited series, you know, think about
Oh,
me.
I
Maybe
already
I
have
could
an
do an
idea who
episode.
I think you would be a good to have you star because I was thinking the resort manager.
Oh yeah,
It's not a
that's a good
huge
one.
role, but it's a nice kind of
Okay.
meaty part. It's kind of
I
important.
love it.
It plays into it. Real
All
quick
right.
in the chat, Nate Pelly, who I guess who was a librarian, says the dwelling has to do with the housing crisis in America.
Yes,
So
it
for
does.
people who need to go check out that book, so that's coming out. So Christine, we've kind of gone a little over. Again, thank you so much for your time, everyone. Check out everything Christine's done. I mean, that would take forever, quite honestly, but she's done it all. She's a Renaissance woman. So thanks so much for your time, Christine, and we'll see everybody next time. Bye.